anybody who's new, my name's Beth Wellen. I am the presenter of the History Sharing Program. And today we're going to look at old fish companies. But before we get started, I just, especially for the new folks, explain how this program works. It's called the History Sharing Program because we share. I'll share what I've learned and found, but the program is so much better when you folks share what you know, and it's just lots of fun to hear the stories. And if this sparks any type of memory, please speak out. I need to give a short little plug for the people who have gotten this program restarted, and Phyllis A. and especially the awesome Gloucester folks were the ones who were able to let me get this restarted. So many thanks to them for this. All right, today we're going to talk about Gloucester fishing companies. The total number of fishing companies in Gloucester, I have no idea, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the hundreds over the centuries. So we're going to look at the ones that I was able to find some information about. There's some that are missing. If anybody knows of other resources, please let me know afterwards, and so I can make this program even bigger and better. But we're going to start in the late 1800s. I have 3 advertisement pages from the old city directories about the 1880s, and you will see some names that might sound familiar because some of our street names are from these families. Perkins, Proctor, Trask, those are all street names we recognize from families who ran fish companies. And you'll notice what kind of things they did with their fish. They dried it, they pickled it. And we're going to see some other things that happened to the fish. Same time period, the New England Fish Company on Dodd's Wharf. That's where Maritime Gloucester is right now. That's the old Dodd's Wharf. Gloucester Fish Company on Fears Wharf. That's now on the property of the building center. The Stockbridge Company was at Steamboat Wharf at the foot of Duncan Street. That's where the harbor master's office is right now. And Union Fish Company on Parkhurst Wharf. Parkhurst is where the Coast Guard station is now. So all 4 of these companies were neighbors right on what we now know as Harbor Loop. Before urban renewal in the 1970s, that was Lower Duncan Street. So that's how you would have accessed. And you see fresh fish listed on this, again, the salt and the pickled. I'm not exactly sure where Joseph Friend's Wharf was, where Smith and Joseph Smith's Wharf is. But I do know where Mr. Homan's was. He was on Gilbert's Wharf. And that is where the Cape Ann Brewing Company is right now. And when I was giving the walking tours and we'd stop and look at Mr. Homan's site, I used to point out he was an exporter, but he was also an importer. Anyone who owned vessels and sent them out places, you didn't like to leave them empty. So he would deliver fish around the world and come back with items like molasses and tea. And that was his business. He would get the fish from the companies who processed the fish, and he would ship it out. You'll also notice Rocky Neck. They were on the other side of the harbor as well. So we had fishing companies all over our waterfront. One of the supporting fishing companies that supported them out of Essex, the people who made the fishing lines, the trawl lines, the gaugings for the dory fishermen. So we needed those companies as well. This is a company, has anybody heard of Chutes and Merchants? They were on Parker Street before the State Fish Pier was built. They were known for drying and pickling, but also smoking fish, especially their halibut, was very well known. And that point was actually nicknamed for quite a while Smoky Point because of the smokehouses that were up there. And this is actually from a website. Grandchildren of Chutes and Merchants have put together a wonderful website. So if you want to Google them, you'll see lots of wonderful pictures about this company that was up there at the head of the harbor. This is, you can see here, the buildings that they operated. This one with the kind of the stripes coming down is one of the old smokehouses. Their same logo again on one of their receipts, order forms, dried and pickled fish. This is a picture from inside. Now, notice, the lighting they're using is actually mostly the windows. They're all up against the windows. And that's all fish waiting to be worked on. And then they are putting in their baskets what they're saving. These pictures are from the late 1800s. Somebody very nicely labeled this image for us. This is the factory where they're working, and here is the office building. Here's that striped building, one of the smokehouses. The fish racks, drying the fish. How many people remember fish racks? Because I know we still had them up until, I think it was like by the end of the 40s they were still around. Even in the 50s we still had the fish racks? Good. Right, and we'll be seeing some of those. So right down here, one of these is chutes, one of these is merchants. I'm not sure which one. And then some of their workers. Again, this is all on Parker Street, up at the head of the harbor. These are stereoscopes of the chutes and merchants property. Again, here's that building with the stripes. And in this picture, you can notice that some of those stripes, what it is openings, that they could change the size of the openings for how much smoke stayed in, how much didn't. All these barrels, pickling the mackerel, would go in those barrels. And the fish flakes, the racks for drying the fish, and some of the wharfs. Now the coloring on this is hand-painted watercolors on an old black and white picture. A lot of times when you see very old postcards that have coloring, it looks like somebody did paint them, and it's because they did. And just make those postcards. But you can see all the fish. I'm sure the barrels didn't come in all those wonderful bright little colors. They're probably all brown. But that's up at the chutes and merchants, looking across. This is up at the head of the harbor area. Now this one's labeled, and notice this building. This is a very distinctive building. It changes hands with times. At this time that this picture was taken, this says 1903, it was Sayward Brothers. Now, what's the street up there? Sayward Street, yep. And so here's his flakes, and there's Mr. Horace Sayward himself. But this property eventually becomes part of Slade Gorton's property, because you'll notice this building we'll see on the Gorton slides. Now, this is the name we do associate the most with our fish companies, but this is the original name. And most of us don't know that name. It was Mr. Slade Gorton who started Gorton's Seafood. He actually lived up in Rockport, and he was a foreman at one of the mills, the Annisquam Cotton Mill up in Rockport. And it burnt down in 1873. So he was without a job. His wife ran a boarding house for the mill workers. And one of the things she did as supplemental income is she would dry and package fish to sell. And so husband's suddenly out of work. She decides, okay, let's do more of our fish. She took the money from her boarding house and bought a fishing boat, rented the motif number 1, this is all according to the Gorton's family legend, and announced her husband Slade, we're now in the fish business. And so they did move it down here to Gloucester, up at the head of the harbor in the East Gloucester side, and started the Slade Gorton Company. Their sons joined the company by the next year, and it was their idea to advertise. So that's why we get this beautiful artwork. They would do billboards along the train lines, and within 10 years, they were nationally known because of their advertising campaign as a fishing company. And by 1899, they had patented their Gorton's fish cakes, and they were well on their way to becoming a very prominent fish company. Here's Mr. Slade Gorton himself right here. And we know it's his building because he put his name on the top. So, and this is all up at East Gloucester. Right now, Joey Shimataro's Captain Joe's and Sons Lobster Company is in that spot. Brown's boatyard. That's all that, the old Slade Gorton property. Here he is again down here, down on the waterfront. This is that same picture, but now we see the other half of it. And they had a smokehouse as well. And remember that building that Mr. Sayward was standing in front of? Here it is again. And this is, you know, Main Street over here. This is the East Gloucester part. And this all becomes part of Gorton's. That building, here it is, right here again, the same building. We're up on the hill looking down, and this is all becomes part of Gorton's as he expands and gets more. What you're seeing here is the old 5-pound island, which is now underneath the State Fish Pier, because what they did is they connected 5-pound to the Parker Street Point where Chutes and Merchants were, to put the current State Fish Pier there. Again, a close-up, you get to see more of 5-pound island here, and that building we were seeing before. Now, you see the State Fish Pier. Okay, so we have moved back, you know, a good couple of decades past, but it's still Gorton's, and it says Gorton's Codfish along here. Buildings aren't there anymore. Now, this is from the water side. And this is an old postcard, and at this point it says Gorton Pugh Fisheries and Company, plant number 1. So apparently it was the first of when they merged, and we're going to be talking about the merger a little later. What you're seeing here, this is the racks, the fish flakes, where everything's drying. These are the vessels all tied up. Big apparatus here for helping to lift the things out, in and out of the holds. And it's hard to tell, but yeah, East Main Street is going down behind here someplace. It's a photograph of that same spot from a slightly different angle. And our wonderful old schooners all tied up, very congested. This is that same wharf we were seeing before, I think. But just the photograph with all the drying fish. And they usually used every single spot. What these, you know, higher pieces are for is when they had to drape a cloth across. But they would use that when they would, you know, didn't have the cloths out. And here it is with the cloths. Now the reason you would put the cloths out is if, number one, it started raining, or the sun is a bit too strong. You don't want it burning the fish as it's drying. So now somebody asked once, it was in an email actually, asking why there's no seagulls in these pictures. The city used to employ a fowler, someone whose job it was to shoot seagulls and also to go and find the nests and destroy the nests. EPA would not allow that now. And as the former mayor, Carolyn Kirk, told me at one point, we couldn't afford it anyway. So, but yeah, definitely seagulls were not as much tolerated as they are today. It'd be really hard to dry fish this way today. So, all right, anybody heard of reed and gamage? No, okay, where this is in East Gloucester, and if you look at this building right here, you might recognize it. It's Beacon Marine. It's one of the oldest buildings on our waterfront, still around. Now what you'll notice is, look at this big building that was out in the water more. That's not there anymore. This is all docks and boats tied up. So this part's gone, but this part is still there. And where the fish flakes were is now where everybody has their boats that are on land, are all parked. But that is Reed and Gamage. They started in 1879, shortly after Slade and Gorton started. Here's some pictures of them again. Now, what I like from here, this is the building, the Beacon Marine building that we recognize. This is the North Shore Art Association. and this is the Pirate Lane condos. What I love is look at all of this area. Now, if you've ever gone here, you'll notice that you can park your car right here next to this building, and then it's water. Yes. All of this over here is gone. That was how much it used to be built out on the water, and that's not there anymore. But you can definitely see all our, our fish flakes going down here, and with their covers on to protect them from burning up. Again, that same building. This is the Reed and Gamage. This building isn't there anymore. This is part of what we do recognize as still being there. Okay, that was that building we were just looking at, and then here's some more buildings looking up into Smith Cove. This building right here, that's still there. And there's actually an artist studio in here. So, but this big building is gone. Now, somebody told me that they thought there was a bowling alley in here at one point. Does that sound right to anybody? No? Again, this is the Reed and Gamage property. We'll see this picture a little bit later again on a collage, but not as much fish drying, but there is some, but there's some empty racks here. John Pugh and Son. Now notice his date, 1849. The Pughs predate Gorton's. And when you look at, and we're going to see the Gorton's sign later, you're going to see this date on top, because this is what Gorton's traces its history back to, its oldest company. John Pugh and Son was on Spring Street. We know this as Main Street now. And this is what Gorton's is, where Gorton's is now. And it was actually in 1906 that John Pugh joined with Slade Gorton and Reed and Gamage and another company, David B. Smith, and I've never been able to find any pictures of that, to become the Gorton Pugh Company. And Pugh eventually gets lost. And this is those grounds. Now, this may be the same fish flakes that some people remember. This is on the Gorton's property of where Gorton's is now. Actually, this one even has the date. This says it's 1882 when this picture was taken. And there's a Smith name up here. This is basically where Connolly's Fish Market would have been. This is Sylvania Smith's spot. Again, more of the area that we know as Gorton's. None of these types of boats tied up there now. In fact, boats don't tie up at Gorton's now because everything's trucked in. This is Jordan's Wharf. This is about where Rose Marina is now. Again, all becomes eventually part of Gorton's and the Pugh Company. I love his outfit. A little bit fuzzy, but this does say Gorton's across the top here. This one's 1882, about that same area. Now this one is much more recent. This may be what some of you remember, Mr. Cadina's redfish processing plant. Very nicely, somebody put the date on for me, 1948, when this was. But you might recognize up here, this is Main Street, and that's where Crow's Nest is. Yep. Yep. Now this is from one of the directories, and this is the only reference I could find to Mr. David B. Smith, who became one of the four that joined Gorton Pugh in 1906. And you'll see Reed and Gamage listed here. Again, two of the companies. But right up here, right above it, is Cunningham and Thompson. And Cunningham and Thompson, about a decade or so later, gets bought by Gorton's and joins David Smith's and Reed and Gamage's, and becomes, loses its name. Here's a picture of Cunningham and Thompson working. And this building right here, the white one, helps you locate this. That building is what we in Gloucester all call Blackburn Tavern, most recently Giuseppe's Restaurant. It was whitewashed at one point, and when we did the hotel program 2 months ago, that was the Atlantic House and the Puritan House, and right down in this area, St. Peter's Square, this was on the fort. So, and that did, actually, Gorton's bought it out in 1917, so that it became like the 5th property that they owned after the other 4 merged. But it was during that same time period that World War I activities were building up, and unfortunately, World War I hit Gorton's pretty hard. It was not safe for their vessels to go out fishing, number one. We had a number of our fishing vessels attacked and sunk by U-boats, and also crossing the ocean was not safe to take the fish out. So Gorton's really suffered. They bought up like crazy, and by the time they owned all of these companies and these 5 properties, at that point they had over 1,000 fishermen working for them. They owned over 55 vessels and had another 1,000 men and women working on shore, processing the fish, packing the fish, smoking it, grinding it, cutting it, boning it, all that process. So it was, of course, at one point our biggest employer here in town. And here's some pictures inside. This is from the Gorton's archives. Not exactly sure which buildings some of these are in, but some of the workers. Very fuzzy one, but I like, see, there was ladies working. This one says they're skinning codfish in one of the plants. Right here, that looks to me like Mr. Slade Gorton. So I'm thinking this may be on his side of the property. And when they did merge, Mr. Gorton did stay part of the company for quite a while. In fact, lots of Gortons were part of the company until, I think they told me until maybe about the 1970s is when the last Gorton's was pushed out of the company. Lots of ladies labeling codfish in this picture. And then canning. Again, ladies putting the labels on in the canning. That building this may be in the building that's still there, which we're going to see. The cannery. Yeah. Now, during the Chicago World's Fair, Gloucester had a large presence at that fair and had a very lovely diorama set up. Parts of it are on display at the Cape Ann Museum now with the different types of vessels and different types of buildings from the waterfront. And of course, Gorton's being the biggest supplier of fish had a pretty big display there. And this is pictures from those displays. And notice how early on our Gorton's fishermen start showing up on things. And you can see all the different ways Gorton's process fish. If you look carefully, though, there's something missing. The frozen isn't here yet. Right. They didn't do frozen at first. They dried it, they canned it. There's, in boxes, but it wasn't until, well, actually, in 1923 is when Gorton's had been suffering because of World War I. They almost went bankrupt. Mr. Mussolini over in Italy refused to pay Gorton's for $1 million worth of fish that had been sent out there. And Gorton's was really financially strapped. And they actually filed for bankruptcy, and the government helped them reorganize. And the very next year, in 1924, was when Mr. Clarence Birdseye arrived here in Gloucester and started freezing food. And he developed the process to freeze fish. And that's what saved Gorton's from going under. And so Gorton's and Birdseye started talking about setting up the freezing processes, and that's the only thing Gorton's does now is freeze their fish. So all of this is part of their past, and thanks to Mr. Birdseye, we still have the Gorton's presence here. Again, from their archives, pictures of some of their vessels unloading. They used to just throw it up on the deck on the day with the pitchforks. Piles of it stored until they could start processing it. And you'll notice this is during refrigeration time period. So these are cool rooms, keeping it fresh for them until it gets packaged. Now, does anybody know what this is? Scaler. Yeah, this is the scaler. This is to take the scales off. Actually, I actually had a date. 1938 was when the automatic fish scaling machines were introduced. So that sure saved a lot of time.
I think Clarence Birdseye designed that.
Did he? I wouldn't be surprised because he tried to invent just about everything. And then some of the vessels. Gorton's owned a lot of fishing vessels, but when the Depression hit in 1929, Gorton's had revived because of the fish sticks, but it still got hit severely. It was at that point, just before and after World War I, that they started to downsize, and that's when Gorton started selling off their vessels. And today, of course, they don't own any fishing vessels whatsoever. And they also started selling off some of their properties. As we've seen, there was a total of 5 companies that got merged into Gorton's at this point. And so they started selling off properties. The Reed and Gamage property was sold off and became Booth Fisheries. The Cunningham and Thompson on the fort, they started selling off. And we will recognize and we'll see in some pictures where they used to be and what they consolidated to. Now this you might recognize, it's still there. It's actually the back half now. It used to be the front main headquarters for the Pew Company, and then when they merged, of course, Gorton Pew. Now there's 2 additions off the back, and you enter from Rogers Street instead. Now, this shows, I guess, at the height, because it mentions plant number 1, plant number 2, plant number 3, 4, and 5. Now, plant number 1, this is the original Slade Gorton's over in East Gloucester. Okay? Plant number 2, which is hard to see, but we'll see it in the very next slide, is actually the Clarence Birdseye building, the old Birdseye building on the fort. Here is the Reed and Gamage. This looks like another spot from on East Gloucester. Of course, oh no, one of these is from the side that we're on now. It's hard for me to place all of these from the pictures. I'm still not sure where the top one is. And the vessel office, which we'll see a little later, I have no idea where that was. But there we go. We recognize that building. It used to have a lot more windows. You know, just before they tore it down, there was almost no windows on the water side. But yeah, and it had that neat little stripe pattern on the tower at one point. But that was it. That was part of Gorton's at one point.
The tower
Yep.
that we all knew is on the right, not the other one.
Oh, it's not this one? It's this
Not
big
that
one?
The one on the right.
This-
That tower had that was the elevator.
Okay, yep. Now this is the building where I'm not sure where it was. I'm thinking it's down near where Cruzport is now.
I think it used to be called Pew Lane, and that was down the end of the lane.
Oh.
There used to be houses
Yes.
in there.
And actually, when we do urban renewal, we'll be seeing Pew Lane. Okay, so if this is Pew Lane, this is getting pretty close to where the
But it
cannery
does
is now.
run probably where
Yep.
Cruzport and the Quincy Market is.
Okay, yep. It's called Packing House Number 1. I'm, again, not sure where this one really was. I can't recognize it. I love the little truck here. Not sure exactly where this is in the harbor. And some older versions of their trucks. Gorton Pew Fisheries. And in this one, we see yet another little truck, more modern, but you'll recognize this building's still there. Not Gorton's anymore, though.
It's the theater.
That's the theater.
That's where they used to have
That's the Gloucester Stage Company. It used to be one of their warehouses.
That's where they used to bring the trucks.
Yep, and the trucks would be down here for loading up and everything. And that's the little Gorton's truck right down there. So really, when you think about it, Gorton's was everywhere along the harbor. And we recognize this, and remember I mentioned the date? They took the earliest out of all the companies that they merged from. They took the earliest date, and that date being the Pugh Company, John Pugh Company. And they're still on the Pugh property. Okay, now this is that original building. And now you can see very clearly the additions, and this is the main entrance on Rogers Street now. Yeah. And this is the old cannery building, which we'll take more, see in just a little bit, going down to the waterfront. And this is the seafood center and the old Quincy cold storage, which is now Americold, I think. This was from the Gorton's archives. This was the architectural drawings before they built the seafood center. And they did actually kind of keep to it. It looks fairly close to this, except not that area. But the cannery is still there, although in one of the next picture, the cannery is missing. So I don't know if they had originally thought they were going to take it down, but it's still there.
It's office building.
Yeah.
It's offices now.
Just in the cannery part?
See that
What?
tractor trailer, the truck that's backed into
Yep.
that dock? And on your last show, they were talking about House Street.
Yep.
That's the House Street.
That's the House Street
platform.
entrance. Yep. Right, came right down through here. Now this is from the water side, but that's that same seafood entrance. Here's the cannery here, and you get to see what the waterfront looked like. But this is now Cruiseport, right up here. And here is, again, that same picture, probably just like a decade before it got torn down for Cruiseport. Again, all part of Gorton's, and Gorton's, Rose is already here at this point. No longer fish yards. Now, this is from Gorton's, and I couldn't find the key that went with it. I wish I could, because it's got all these wonderful labels of where things are. No D is where the old headquarter building is, and B is the cannery building, and C is the cold storage building. But it would be great to find out what all these were, and I couldn't find the reference. But yeah, Cruiseport is where, you know, H, F, G, E, that's all Cruiseport now. I and J, that's where Rose Marina is now. And you can see from this picture, this is before Rogers Street got extended. So, you know, Pugh Court, Pugh Lane, Howe, they're all still there at that point. You can see the little houses going down there. All right, another area up here is the cannery. And here's the headquarters. Well, we're losing the original headquarters, but the main headquarters. We're right here. And the old theater, which is now the package store. So, what's also neat about this picture is you can actually see the shape of what was left of Vincent Cove at the time. This area here was Vincent Cove coming in, and then all this parking lot. That was the old Vincent Cove that got filled in. And here's some pictures of the old cannery. Now offices, you said?
A lot of it's been turned.
Cannery is now
Offices.
offices,
Yeah.
stock room.
Mm-hmm.
That trailer used to be
Right here?
the headquarters for the guy who was in charge of quality control there.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, this is a pretty old building. We're actually kind of lucky it's still there.
Really old.
And this is coming down behind it. Most of us don't get to go down and see, you know, down this area. Of course, liquid nitrogen used for the freezing process.
Freeze the McDonald's fish.
Mm-hmm.
You work on it. You work on it.
Yeah. Now, Al Bazanson was telling me there used to be a room that the McDonald's people would come to watch the process, and it had a glass roof, and every time before the McDonald's people would come to watch, they'd have to go wash off the glass roof because of all the seagull stuff. Now this is a great picture because we can now retrace all those places that we went to, although Beacon Marine is a little bit off here. So Reed and Gamage, which Gorton's did buy out. Up here, this is where Slade Gorton's was that they bought out. This is the State Fish Pier. So if you remember, if you cut off the pier and just look at this area, this is where Chutes and Merchants were. Up here at the head, that's where the D.B. Smith Company was. That became Gorton's. Gorton's is, of course, still there, and the original Pew. And then Gorton's also got this area. Reed and Gamage was actually on this side, and of course, the Bird's Eye building there. So Gorton's was everywhere at one point. Sold off a lot of it so that they're only where we know them now. I do know that, of course, the old Slade Gorton property still has Joey's, Shimataro's, Captain Joe's and Sons lobster processing happening. But I do want to talk about this area right here because just after I had originally put all this program together, I was able to find some pictures right here of this blue building. How many people remember Empire?
Yeah, spent a lot of time there.
It's blue now. But yeah, I was like, ooh, another fish company. And it was not Gorton's. So never did become part of Gorton's. But they are, and those buildings are still there, and it's still doing fishing. And this picture predates the urban renewal because this is Duncan. This is still Duncan, Lower Duncan Street, and this is Harbor Loop, and this is now all the park. And we're going to see another picture where you see that these buildings and the one behind it are all missing. It's all grass now. But this building is still here, the one on the left and the one on the right. They're still there. And you can tell they're pretty warped and old looking.
Curry.
Yeah, there's the fish.
That was headed to the state pier.
Yeah. No, this is all Empire. And some of the gear, the inside, you can see the Empire labels here. And some of the workers, now I did this program last week at Seacoast, and some of the people were saying, oh, they knew the names of some of these people. Because this company was still around. It closed down in 1991. But the property is still being used for fishing. Used to employ hundreds of people. Now apparently it has 2 because of all the equipment that can do everything for them now. They don't need all these people. But you might recognize some of these people. In fact, we have one person here who used to work here. We might actually see you in the pictures, so we'll watch carefully. Cleaning the fish, cutting up the fish, cutting again. And you can tell, he's like, oh, they're filming me. He's smiling. I'm sure he wasn't smiling all the time when he was working.
One of them back too doesn't have a hat on.
Yeah.
No, he's got a black hat on.
And look at this guy, he's smoking while he's doing it. Definitely wouldn't have been allowed today.
I don't know why I had a hairnet on. They allowed smoking.
This is the labeling, the boxing, that it came in rolls, and so it's being cut up. And we'll see the ladies, and now it's been folded up into boxes, but you can see the ladies are assembling those. Yep. Does anybody remember doing this?
Doing it? I worked on the machine.
Yep.
1 pound wrapper. Those are 1 pound packages.
Now I'm guessing that these is from probably pictures are probably from the 50s, early 60s. Yeah, saddle shoes. 50s, 60s maybe?
50s.
50s.
Oh, no, actually 60s.
60. Okay. I noticed that one of the ladies had slacks on. Yeah. So that's Empire. Now, does anybody know what it's called now? I mean, because it was in '91 that they went bankrupt, and actually because of unsavory practices, they got fined by the United States government a lot of money, along with Ocean Crest Seafood. So yeah. But are there any other thoughts or things people want to share?
I just have a question. I know there's someone named Slade Gordon that lives in like Washington State, or did they have fisheries there? Did he move fisheries there, or is that a relative?
Okay, the Slade Gorton, who is a senator from the West Coast, he is not from the fishing industry. The Gortons who come down from our Gortons, they actually still exist, and there is another Slade Gorton, and they have started they have a company called Slade Gorton. It operates out of Boston, and they are a very large fishing company. The Gorton family basically got pushed out of Gorton's when Gorton's got bought out by the international groups, and so the family decided to open up their own company. Gorton's is trademarked, and they couldn't use the name Gorton's anymore, but they could use the name Slade Gorton, which is the original name. So if you Google, you'll see there is a Slade Gorton's company that operates worldwide, and that is the descendants of our Slade Gorton and the original founders of Gorton's. Our Gorton's is owned by a large international company. They're all over the world, the properties that they own. Is it Japanese now or is it Scandinavian now? It's Japanese, yeah.
Used to be Unilever, General Mills.
Yeah. So
There's no such thing as fish sticks.
the Gorton family. The Boston, yeah, that's the Gorton family. Yeah. So I actually met one of them. It's actually one of the wives, and she was telling me the history. And basically, the Gorton company moved out. They moved all the Gorton people to properties like in the Midwest, and to get them out of Gloucester so that they could have, gain control. And so the Gortons basically got pushed out of the company. Well, thank you. If I could have somebody turn on the lights, it'd be easier for people.